super privileged to have Melinda Roper take us on another high-rise where we can see where we came from in order for us to be able to map out where we're going. And I want to thank Bill for his students. And one of the students did a beautiful poster out there yesterday, and it featured Melinda. Unfortunately, she didn't get to see it because she wasn't there. But I think most of us who saw it would agree with me that if the student was here, Roxana, is she here by any chance? No. Otherwise, I was going to invite her over to introduce Melinda. But I will do that. She did a wonderful job already, so we know you very well from engaging with Roxana yesterday. Originally from Chicago, Sister Melinda Roper attended Michigan State University and then entered the Maryknoll Sisters congregation in Maryknoll, New York. With the Maryknoll Sisters, she served in various roles, beginning with Sisters Novitiate at Topside from 1960 to 63. Then she taught high school in Guatemala, and following this, she joined the Pastoral Center in Merida, Yucatan, Mexico, where she was involved in catechetical work. She also spent a year in Chiapas in Mexico, studying the dialect of indigenous people. That's quite a challenge. In 1971, she earned a BA in theology from Loyola University in Chicago. And returning to Guatemala, she served on the staff of Centro Apostolico out there. I can't pronounce that word. That's fine. After 14 years in Central America, Sister Melinda was elected president of the Maryknoll Sisters Congregation, an office she held for 7 years, just 2 years into a term as president. On December 2, 1980, 4 U.S. church women were murdered in El Salvador. Among them, 2 Maryknoll sisters. And at this moment, I feel compelled for us to just acknowledge them and observe a moment of silence. Thank you. During her years as president, Sister Melinda received various honorary degrees, including the Doctor of Humane Letters from Loyola University, Emmanuel College, Fordham University, Catholic University of America, Regis College, New School of Research, etc. In 1985, she was assigned to the Vicariate of Darién in Panama, where she remains in ministry today, 32 years later. The rest you can read from this. I wanted to invite you to welcome Sister Melinda so we don't waste any more time.
In forests, trees fall when their time comes. Where I live, we have just cut down 4 big trees because they were close to our buildings and had grown too tall. With the summer winds, the danger of their falling had increased significantly. From our perspective, they had become dangerous and had to be eliminated. My greetings to each of you this evening as we continue to explore the illusions, contradictions, challenges, and wonders of living today. And we do this as women, and we do it with planet Earth. For more than 30 years, we have been attempting to live in harmony with the tropical rainforest of Darién, Panama. When the trees were taken down, I wondered if we had learned anything. And I'm not referring simply to a gap in our learning process or to our lack of knowledge. I'm referring to evolving consciousness that is in a fascinating, creative, demanding dynamic that springs from the transformation of relationships as well as of ideas. Thus, I begin this talk with questions and contradictions which intend to be helpful and stimulating for the adventure of living into the future. Most of you are familiar with Rainer Maria Rilke's quote taken from Letters to a Young Poet. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then, gradually and without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Living questions is an important life experience for me because it keeps me open and alert to mystery, to wonder, and to adventure. The illusion of security and having the right answers can keep one frozen, limiting our ability to forgive those who we perceive to be wrong, and in the end, curtailing the opportunity to be forgiven, limiting every possibility for growth. One of the marvels of being alive today is that we can be very certain that what we don't know is so much greater than what we think we know. For example, I grew up thinking that the world was about 6,000 years old. 13.8 billion is quite different, and it's not just numerically. The experience of finding oneself within an evolutionary process billions of years old and floating on a pale blue dot through an ever-expanding universe has been for me an adventure in faith. An adventure where all relationships are continually challenged and renewed. And from this experience, I share the following questions which come to me as a woman of faith in mission. When and how did gospel give way to dogma, certainty, and creed? When and how did parable and story give way to doctrine and catechism? When and how did prayer give way to reciting prayers? When and how did Eucharist give way to saying Mass? When did the seed, the leaven, the nesting birds of the kingdom of God give way to a kingdom, temples, and altars of human design and construction? When did the church as community give way to church as institution? When did the widow's mite give way to tax-free fundraising and weekly envelopes? When did authority as service give way to apostolic succession, canon law, and the Curia? When did the justice of forgiveness give way to the right to judge and exclude according to the law? When did Jesus of Nazareth, prophet, give way to Christ the King and High Priest? When did Mary of Nazareth, wife of Joseph and mother of Jesus, become the Queen of Heaven adorned with jewels and costly robes? While these questions are the kind that come forth from living and are ultimately answered by how we live, I believe that academic exploration as part of the human experience is vital to our evolving awareness and commitment to life and to the future. In this context, there is one more question which must be asked considering the theme of this conference, and I would phrase it in the following manner. How did the way that Jesus treated women, that is, with deep trust and respect, come to be set aside and forgotten by the official church? I'm not necessarily referring to personal attitudes and the behavior of individuals, but I do mean the operating structures, policies, and law by which the church functions and is governed, and which in turn dictate the modes of relationship within it. For some clerics, to live the gospel within this context must be deeply painful, as it certainly is for many of us women. And the pain to which I refer is not that we are excluded from the hierarchical structures, but rather that those particular structures exist at all. In the human community, structure reflects and reinforces values, attitudes, beliefs, and relationships, while at the same time, these strengthen and maintain the structures. So now we may ask, what are the structures that can facilitate the spirit and style of Jesus to flow freely today? It seems to me that this conference is providing a forum to challenge and explore logics, philosophies, and theologies essential to a new practice of living and celebrating our faith. I think that most of us look for ideas and experiences which help us understand life, ourselves, and alternatives for the future. The following 4 ideas and quotes reflect major experiences and learnings in my life as a woman in the church, and have led me to know deeply in my heart that the wind blows wherever it wishes. You hear the sound of it that it makes, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. I find the following helpful when deciding how to live each day as a woman of faith in Darién. A few years, a scripture scholar shared with us some implications of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 of the Christian era. He left us with the following observation. With the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, the altar, and the priesthood ceased to exist. This was an experience of the early Christian community in Jerusalem as well as the Jewish community. Can we imagine the church of tomorrow without temple, without altar, and without priest? If not, perhaps we can imagine an alternative organization where administrative, economic, and political functions of the church are separated from what is presently the liturgical ministry. That was the first of the 4 points. The second one is that in the gospel story, the women are given the mission to share the news of the resurrection with the disciples. According to Matthew and Mark, the women were to tell the disciples that Jesus would meet them in Galilee, not in the capital city of Jerusalem. According to Mark, the disciples did not believe the women, and Luke says, "But the apostles thought that what the woman said was nonsense and did not believe them." Why is there so much fear and resistance in the contemporary church concerning our mission to bring the good news of resurrection and of life to all of creation? Given the outrageous destruction of the whole community of life today, we women are not permitted to speak in the temple, but we do go and are present in Galilee. The third experience, in Luke 10 we read, "At that time Jesus was filled with joy by the Holy Spirit and said, 'Father, Lord of heaven and earth, I thank you because you have shown to the unlearned what you have hidden from the wise and the learned.'" Yes, Father, this was how you were pleased to have it happen. Most of my adult life, I have lived among people who have had little formal schooling. I have participated in celebrations of the Word where the reflection of the delegate of the Word was filled with the wisdom of life according to Jesus. I have also heard abstract ideas laced with anecdotes and reminiscences in homilies that frequently don't even mention the gospel. One day when my frustration level was very high and I was spouting off about environmental destruction caused by the big teak tree plantations in Darién, Adelia, a local campesina woman, said to me, "But Melinda, we know all that. We just don't believe." What is hidden from those of us who study and are learned? Adelia would ask us not what we know, but what we believe. I think they'll take a drink of water. Okay, this is the fourth point, and it's also in chapter 10 of Luke. Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan to a teacher of the law who tries to trap him. The theme or issue of religious practice is extremely difficult and sensitive to talk about and to deal with. And I truly hesitate to bring it up because as a public religious figure, I am in a certain sense in the role of teacher of the law. On the other hand, I think I understand what Jesus is saying in the parable. Where I am so profoundly challenged is by the respect that Jesus shows the teacher, even though the teacher was trying to trap him. And this is the lesson for me today. By encouraging the teacher to respond to his own question in light of the parable, Jesus diffuses the debate, which will always have the same winner, that is the one most proficient in the law. Jesus changes the question from one of religious practice to one of living faith. And Jesus concluded, in your opinion, which one of the three acted like a neighbor toward the man who was attacked by the robbers? The teacher of the law answered, the one who was kind to him. Jesus replied, go then and do the same. Jesus changed the situation from a debate about religious law to one of living faith. The living awareness of these 4 points, and that is the questioning the centrality of temple, altar, and priest to our religious practice, the mission of the women to announce the resurrection and new life to the disciples, the wisdom of the unlearned, and the priority of kindness over the fulfillment of the law have led me to feel the wind. At the end of chapter 2 of John's Gospel, Jesus has a violent encounter with the authorities of the temple. Conversation with them was impossible because, according to the author, he himself, Jesus, knew what was in their hearts. After this incident, we are introduced to Nicodemus, a Jewish leader, member of the party of the Pharisees, and a great teacher in Israel. He represented a dimension of the religious establishment quite different from the temple authorities. Before reflecting on this encounter of Jesus and Nicodemus, I would like to recall another moment when Nicodemus appears in John's Gospel, and that's in chapter 7, where there's a discussion among religious authorities about Jesus' identity and mission. I think it best to read the text. When the guards went back, the chief priests and Pharisees asked them, "Why did you not bring him?" The guards answered, "Nobody has ever talked the way this man does." "Did he fool you too?" the Pharisees asked them. "Have you ever known one of the authorities or one Pharisee to believe in him? This crowd does not know the law of Moses, so they are under God's curse." One of the Pharisees there was Nicodemus, the man who had gone to see Jesus before. And he said to the others, "According to the law, we cannot condemn people before hearing them and finding out what they have done." "Well," they answered, "are you also from Galilee? Study the scriptures, and you will learn that no prophet ever comes from Galilee." So with this additional information about Nicodemus, let's return to the nocturnal meeting with Jesus. Jesus expresses surprise that Nicodemus doesn't understand about the freedom of God's Spirit. Perhaps because he, Nicodemus, had only experienced God's presence through the Scripture, the temple, and his own attempt to live according to the law. But he also knew that prophets were vital to Israel's history and to their living faith. I think he sensed that Jesus was a prophet. Jesus does not quote Scripture with Nicodemus, but he uses the images of wind, water, and being born to convey the experience of new life and energy as God present. I understand these images to signal God as present beyond our imagining, and above all, beyond our control. From what I have been able to gather, wind as well as water are universal symbols present in most cultures. Wind symbolizes the unknown, the unpredictable, and the uncontrollable. It represents the mystery which is perceived and felt, but not seen. For me, the wind symbolizes the creativity and freedom of God and of all that gives life. The biblical imagery is exciting. Ruah, the breath of God present, creative, moving, evolving. And in the poetry of the Psalms, God rides on the wings of the wind and uses the winds as messengers. Speaking with God, the psalmist says, "But when you give them breath, they are created. You give new life to the earth." There are numerous spiritualities, both within and beyond the Judeo-Christian traditions, that describe the activity and presence of wind, air, breath, as the creative energy of the cosmos. The following is not traditional Christian vocabulary, but the underlying experience seems similar. In the quote, "The energy of the dance of creation arises out of pure awareness or existence, the unlimited energy of the universe, and this energy is love." And that's from the Ayurveda tradition, a holistic approach to health and longevity. Perhaps the political and religious situations after the destruction of Jerusalem were in kind of a survival mode, and law had become their security. But be that as it may or may not be, I suggest that one of the greatest obstacles to experiencing the wind that blows wherever it wishes is the illusion that we can control God's presence through knowledge, ritual, and law. I perceive that Nicodemus was a good religious person who couldn't let the Spirit of God flow freely in his life. He was faithful to his religious tradition at a confusing and troubling time. He probably experienced anxiety and fear at the unpredictability of the wind, and this limited his understanding of what Jesus was sharing and wanted him to grasp. It's an anxiety that many of us can identify with. Yet at the same time, we are fortunate to be alive during this moment in history when science is revealing so many aspects of the mystery of life and of the universe. A moment when open discussion and dialogue among science, spirituality, and religion are more and more inclusive, and when our awareness and consciousness continue to evolve. It seems that the wind, as usual, is unpredictable, both wild and gentle. How will the church of the future be a living sign of the coming of the kingdom of God? How can its organization and the structures feel and hear the wind as it blows so freely? How can our worship be in spirit and in truth? How do we move into the answers of these living questions? My personal experience and how I understand the gospel tell me that to be excluded from the hierarchical aspect of church offers us, as women, the space and freedom to serve and to worship without fear. At times we do experience hurt, anger, and even fear as members of this church. We live in a particularly shameful time when in societies around the world, violence against women is increasingly blatant. This violence is not absent from the church. Can we name it? Spiritual violence? The theme of the Latin American calendar for this year, which is a publication by the Claretians, is gender equality. The bishops of Guatemala have forbidden its sale in the country. In the publication, there is an article by David Molyneux from Chile, where we read, "Machismo continues causing incalculable suffering and tragedy." It is enough, for example, to be aware of the drama of femicide in the different countries of our region. But machismo is not patriarchy. It is its pathetic bastard son. The role of religions in the Western patriarchal society is well documented, and the documentation of femicide in the West is currently being carefully analyzed. The following quote from Eduardo Galeano Latin American writer bears scrutiny. There are criminals that blatantly proclaim, "I killed her because she was mine," just as though it were common sense, the height of all justice, as is the right to private property, that makes the man the owner of the woman. But not one, not one, even the most macho of the super machos, has the courage to confess, "I killed her," from fear. Because after all, woman's fear of the violence of man is the mirror of the fear that a man has of a woman who is fearless. End of quote. But let's move beyond fear. How does the wind blow in our world today? Quite similarly to the days of Jesus, I should think. Outside of officialdom, how does Jesus inspire us to live? And I have a little list that I'll share with you. To live so that the quality of our relationships be based on profound respect for the dignity of the other, with preference for the excluded, children, women, the elderly, and those who are not like me. To live so that unlimited kindness and compassion in the use of our time, energy, and resources be the style of how we live. To live so that unlimited forgiveness calls forth the beauty and goodness of each other. To live so that healing the pains and wounds of the lonely, the injured, the sick, and the hungry be the living sacrament of God present. To live so that our words, teachings, and reflections reveal the loving kindness of our God and encourage those who listen to live with the Spirit of Jesus. To live so that our wisdom flows freely from the totality of our commitment to the common good. To live so that we contemplate, pray, and celebrate our faith in community. If we are learning to live with the Spirit that blows where it wishes, we need not be overly concerned with the hierarchical church. I suggest that new organizational models of church will be created by those who experience the wind where it blows where it wishes. And I venture to say that most of these folks will be those most free of the present operational structure, and that is laity and women. What could happen if church structures and organizations began to take form from planet Earth, where the wind blows where it wishes? The Earth flag is beautiful in and of itself. It offers us many opportunities to contemplate the wonders of the wind. One observation that becomes clear to the observer is that superimposed political boundaries do not appear. They are not there. The Earth flag invites us to dream dreams and have visions beyond the nation state and beyond the current operative competitive economic systems. And I do not believe that the nation state is an adequate model for an operating structure of the church, and much less for the dream of the kingdom. Science is offering us inspiring organizational principles such as differentiation, interiority, and communion, not to mention quantum entanglement. From microbiology to astrophysics, dynamic structures of life in the universe are being discovered. Are these the new parables of the coming of the kingdom? It seems to me the church, as a living sacrament of God present, should be in the forefront of discovering new organizational models for and with the human community. It is understandable that the human community throughout its history has created social, economic, political, and religious structures as part of its own development. But we are at a new moment. We have new tools, we have new information that allow us to understand and analyze more carefully the superimposed structures which we have placed both on planet Earth and on the gospel. The beauty, energy, and wonders of both gospel and planet Earth are revealing themselves to us today. We are being invited into a new moment of creativity and integrity as our living structures reflect more faithfully those of planet Earth and gospel. Both Earth and gospel are alive. Changing structures is risky, but it's also so exciting and so necessary. We can't wait 500 years, as did the official church, to admit the truth of planet Earth's relationship with the sun. Science tells us that the universe is ever expanding. What a wonderful image for God, an ever expanding, evolving energy beyond our calculations and our imagining. Do we of the human community reduce God to our short history? Do we reduce our experience of God not only to our short history, but also to our limited experience? Rather, let us feel and hear the wind as we venture forth in consciousness, ever more aware, through the gratuitousness of faith, that we are little living signs of a God whose love is ever expanding. The following gospel experiences shed light, I believe, on our present moment. The first is from our courageous but cautious friend Nicodemus. After this, Joseph, who was from the town of Arimathea, asked Pilate if he could take Jesus' body. Joseph was a follower of Jesus, but in secret, because he was afraid of the Jewish authorities. Pilate told him he could have the body, so Joseph went and took it away. Nicodemus, who at first had gone to see Jesus at night, went with Joseph, taking with him about 100 pounds of spices, a mixture of myrrh and aloes. The two men took Jesus' body and wrapped it in linen cloths with the spices, according to the Jewish custom of preparing a body for burial. The second is an extravagant sacramental gesture beyond custom, tradition, and law. Let us listen and be inspired. Now, when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at table. When the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me. For you always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. and pouring the ointment on my body, she has done it to prepare me for burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Nicodemus and the woman who anoints Jesus are present among us today. How will we move into the future together, both cautiously and extravagantly? The wind will continue to blow where it wishes. And now I must return to the forest, to my home where we cut down the trees. And yet before I do so, I will leave you with two more questions. One, what once grew where you now live? And the second one, how will we grow into the future? We are immersed in a moment within our evolving consciousness when opportunities flourish for creatively and totally living into the common good, energized by the Spirit of Jesus. What a wonderful time to be alive. Certainly, not just questions, comments, agreements, disagreements, and anybody can agree or disagree with anyone else. So the questions won't be directed just to me, okay? Or the comments. So please, there are lots of questions, and I learned that a keynote, according to, when I wrote it, I said, well, what's a keynote? And he said, well, it's something, you don't have a specific theme. You're supposed to open things up and get things going. And so that's what I tried to do. So really feel free to explore, ask any questions. I probably don't have the answers, but someone here might. And maybe we can all share.
As a 50-plus year Star Trek fan, thank you very much for putting this whole conference in the context of evolution. And I loved your statement, do we reduce God to our short history and our limited experience? And I think that, I just want to say, I have, ever since I was studying theology at CTU and at CTS, I've always had this kind of cognitive dissonance about the spirit and the blowing wind. And it seems to me, I remember a professor at Chicago Theological Seminary saying to me once, you could put all the books about God the Father in a room, it would fill a huge room. You could put all the books about spirit on a single shelf about this wide. You know? And so this idea that I think one of the frustrating concepts for me is that Jesus sent the Spirit, or that we do our understanding of the Spirit through Christology. And so thank you for expanding our sense of the time that we're in and the new moment that we're in, and what a wonderful thing that is. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm Mary Lou.
Thank you, Melinda. Especially, I resonate with the fact that you mentioned about Ruach. The breath of God, the wind where it blows. Some years ago when I was teaching creation spirituality, I came across not only Ruah, but Neshama and Aloha. And I was thinking about And when God created the human person, God breathed into the person, Come on, girls. Boys. So God created all of us in laughter. And we know not where our winds go, but they go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for identifying fear is the reason why this woman was killed. It makes me wonder, as women, anything that we could do to make those who fear less fearful.
Wonderful question. The question is for all of us.
Yes.
The job of the keynote speaker is to answer those questions.
Okay, one thing that no, you.
While she's going to the microphone, if I could jump in on the fear question, Lillian, I'm really happy for you to bring us back to that one again. One of the things that I've been meaning to do for a long time is to count how many times in the Gospels Jesus says, "Do not fear." And it seems to me that that is the biggest obstacle of any from keeping us from living the gospel more fully.
So, and I think another example of how women can help one another erase that, a little bit of that fear has been given to us in several examples today. The example of the women who blew the whistle, they blew the whistle, and so they knew that there were other people out there that had their back. And the same with the story about I keep forgetting what country they were from, but where the women all got together and went surrounded the house of the man who was the abuser. And just that awareness that there are other people that will surround me, that this is a community of women, I think might do somewhat to erase that, or at least lessen that fear.
Thank you.
So to come back.
You can answer your own question?
I just want to clarify it a little. So the question is not directed to the women. It's actually directed to the man who killed the woman. And at first he thought he killed her because she was his.
Right.
But the real reason why he killed him is because he feared her. Was that correct, or did I misunderstand something?
No, that's
What I understood Galliano to say is that when women lose their fear of men being able to kill them, then the fear gets reversed, and it is the man who becomes fearful of the woman who loses her fear. Your question, I understand, is how do we lose our fear? How do we become fearless?
It's about the man.
Is it-
No, it's about how
us.
to mitigate the male person's fear.
Right.
How can we claim our place without displacing, as someone said this morning? We're not trying to displace or dismiss
Or replace.
or replace the male. How can we help the male understand that we are just trying to claim our place while not displacing the male? which causes him to be fearful.
Right. And out of that fear comes violence.
Yes.
And out of our fear comes violence lots of times too. So, yes.
And part of that answer is with the 2-year-old little boy.
And the mother.
And I heard somebody say, the mother, as I was sitting thinking about that, I thought I'd just say what I just said, but of course that what it means. We have a mother we see and we hear, and she's frightening, and maybe we need to help her so that she's able to raise her son without each case is gonna be different, but he didn't become fearful last week.
No. Yes.
I brought along a book that I was reading on the train, Tattoos on the Heart by Greg Boyle, and it seems to me that the only way, not the only way, but one way to conquer or to respond to fear is through love and compassion. And, I mean, he's dealing with these young men and some young women who, you know, who are fearful on some level and are acting violently, and his response is to see the God in them and to respond with compassion. So.
You know that saying, and I think it's the first letter of John, about perfect love casts out fear? I always thought when I was young, oh, that means when I learn how to love and everything, then I will cast out fear and other people and all that. And Regina McElroy, a Maryknoll sister, said to me one day, no, Melinda, you have it backwards. It's when someone loves you that you lose your fear. And so, in that sense, I don't know what the correct biblical interpretation is, but I think practically, well then let's love one another. That sounds very simple, but and in loving the other, the fear in the other, not my fear, but the other, it helps to dissipate the fear, which is, I think, based on a lot of lack of trust, lack of confidence. We can't trust ourselves, and we certainly can't trust anyone else. And so when somehow we have to move beyond that to a different kind of trust, and we have so many situations we've heard about during these days, and so many situations in our own lives where we know that the fear doesn't just vanish. It's not some magical formula, but and there's another little thing. I'm hesitant to say it, but I think I really, no, I do believe it, and that is it has to do with totality, and the totality. It's not something that's fixed. This is my goal in life, and I am going to work toward that totally with all my energy and everything. No. It's a totality that's flexible, that's open, that's adventurous, it's a totality, well, I had said it there, of always moving and trying to discover the common good. And I think that the totality, Barbara, I loved your comment on suffering. And you can't suffer just to suffer. Or you can't suffer for reasons that are problems to be solved. But there's another aspect of suffering that is, it's moving beyond yourself. It's with others into a totality that makes sense in light of the common good. It won't make sense in light of my own good. But somehow I think that's another element in how fear can disappear or be lessened in our lives. Yeah.
I talk from here.
Microphone would be better.
So I was interested in your references to structure and changing and the effect on planet Earth and on the gospel. And I just wondered how your experience in Panama and other countries cast some light on that.
Okay, I spent the first years of my life in mission in Guatemala and in Mexico. Especially in Guatemala, the situation was one of civil war, of violence, of tremendous suffering. And then when I was on our governing board for 6 years, that was also a time of great confusion and loss, not understanding lots of things, learning to perhaps understand a little bit more about what the suffering that Jesus represents and almost invites us to, or does invite us to. And then when I went to Panama, Darién is quite an isolated area, it was more so than it is now. It was a very small population, agricultural frontier. The people had no knowledge or understanding or information about any civil war anywhere. And this is just a very short distance away. They were living in a totally different reality of being poor, of migrating to another part of Panama in search of land so that they could feed their families. Was that basic? They never heard of Oscar Romero, nothing. And so a couple of us who were there, our experience had been in Central America. And so we're like, now what do we do? You know, there's no heavy social analysis to figure out who's right and who's wrong in terms of war, in terms of revolution, in terms of the extreme injustice, institutionalized violence and all. And so it was, well, now how do we go about this? What sense could the gospel make here if we're not in a revolutionary situation? And little by little, we began to get to know the people. We let them, I think, teach us a new understanding of life and what it means to survive, what it means to a different kind of suffering. And then all of a sudden we found ourselves, this sounds so silly, after about 6 or 7 years there, I asked myself, what is a rainforest? I didn't even know where I was. Now that happens lots of times, I think, in our lives. And as we began to discover more and more what a rainforest was, how important it is to the life and health of planet Earth, and all of a sudden we realized that we were in a situation of a whole other kind of violence that has to do with the destruction of the whole community of life, not just the human community destroying itself. But we were in and the destruction of the community of life, the forest, was for the human community to survive. And that's why I started off by talking about cutting down the trees. I'm still doing it. You know, it was in our way. And so we cut down the trees. This was just 2 weeks ago. You know? And so it's like, the question about structures, I'm not a sociologist. I do know from 60 years of personal experience of living within the institutionalized church as a woman committed to mission. It's not working very well. I mean, it really isn't. That's my experience. That's a terrible conclusion to arrive at this point. But it seems to be getting worse.
Yeah.
You know, and so and this is where we live. But then when I came back and I began asking a few people, and there is a lot of reactionary fear within the institutionalized church.
Yeah.
And that fear is not going, no matter what the structures are, it's not going to help. And so that's why at one point I said, well, you know, if we feel in this room here tonight that we have felt the wind, even a bit, we have insights, we have experience, and we have felt the wind. We have to continue in that, and no matter what the structures evolve into, the structures have to change. I mean, well, they have to change. You know? And I think that, as I had said before, that the whole opportunities that we have for exploring new strength. The same thing that has happened to planet Earth has happened to gospel. They've been layers and layers and layers of stuff on top of it that don't let it. We're killing the planet Earth. Why? Because of all the structures we've put on top of it. I think we're killing the gospel, and because of a lot of structures and practice and stuff. So how do we let that come forth? How do we let the wind blow freely? And I certainly don't know. I think I'm not a scientist, and I use some of those terms. I don't even know what they mean. But I know, I've read it and I know it, but I can't explain it. But I know there's something there about differentiation, interiority, communion. That's science. That's not religion. You know, and that's what Earth is, and that's what Earth is calling us to. And isn't that what gospel is calling us to? I think we just have to look for other places for this. What is a rainforest? You know, somebody from a lumber company goes into a rainforest, and what do they see? They see the trees that they can cut down and take out and sell. A farmer, a poor farmer, sees a rainforest. They also cut down the forest, but for different reasons. An artist goes into a forest and looks around, and what does she see? A spiritual person, or one of us, goes into a forest, and what do we see? A biologist goes in, and so we'll see all. But what I have learned about the forest is that it's very fragile. It's organized in such an intricate way that science keeps, the Smithsonian Institute and everything that's in Panama, they keep studying and studying and studying and keep discovering more and more marvels about biodiversity, complementarity, interrelatedness, the whole thing. And that's what keeps planet Earth going. But wouldn't that be what would keep gospel going, gospel alive, kind of those same, I think we have to look someplace beyond human history for new structures. Because there's nothing better than democracy, right? we haven't moved in the last 300 years. I mean, so I just think that we have to, we have new places to look and new tools and new wonderful things. I encourage all of us. Oh, and by the way, thank you for the moment of silence. And I say it not just in respect for Mara and Dorothy and Ita and the 72,000 people or more now who have been eliminated, killed, martyred in El Salvador. But I say it because I found out at a Maryknoll congregational meeting last year that contemplative silence, community contemplative silence, is one of the most wonderful experiences. Just imagine, it's silence and it's contemplative, and we contemplate together. And so I thank you for that. I think that happened this evening. And is there any other comment? Because if there isn't, I would invite us to another moment of contemplative silence, and with that we can. And I've learned a wonderful greeting. Many of you know it. I believe it's from India. Namaste. Namaste.
mind-blown sound helped me to think and appreciate the gifts of fearlessness and an answer which I think we got, or at least I got, about endless hope. We were challenged earlier in the first session about endless hope, and I kept musing over that the entire day, wondering what endless hope looks like. But I feel like we are there. So thank you very much.